Right, okay. I was expecting an adult audience actually, so I'm awfully sorry because there's a little bit of sex in this, but not too much, and I'll moderate it. I'm basically interested in how people get technologies to work on an everyday basis. Specifically, my research has been around digital media, specifically digital games, social networking sites, those kinds of things. I come at this very much from the idea of technologies not always playing out in the way that the designer intended them to. So the idea is that when a technology is rolled out to people, basically people play around with it in situ and make it work for them, although they might well be influenced by how the technologies work themselves. So you've got this constant, the technology shapes what we do, in contrast to us sort of saying, well, we're going to make the technology work for us. This presentation is very much about how a very specific group of people use a very specific form of social media, social networking technology, or don't use it. I'm also interested in non-users as well as users. And how in using that, it crafts an identity for them in one particular place. But also being aware that we have different versions of ourselves scattered around the place, whether that's online or offline. And I think what's happened with a lot of research in this area today is that we've tended to focus on single-site studies. So we've got a study of Facebook or a study of YouTube. What I'm interested in is what happens when these things come together, and that's what I'm going to talk about today. The added thing I want to talk about is some of the commercial interests associated with these sites and how they might well attempt to commodify difference in order to basically make money out of these things, and how that further fuels the identity creation process. And then I want to move on and look at how people maybe challenge that by engaging in other sites of social media. So essentially what I'm going to do is, what you'll see down here is a list of sites that you would generally recognize, bar one, which is the one that says join millions of men. Basically, I want to look at a site called Gaydar, which is basically a networking come internet dating kind of site for predominantly gay men or men who would have sex with men. And look at how that site configures these people, how the commodification of difference is implicated in the configuration of the identities of these people, but how other technologies are enrolled to try and destabilize that as well. And I think this isn't just relevant, this idea, to, say, the LGBT community. It's a much broader thing. There are loads of niche social media sites out there that configure people in particular ways and that can lead to difficulties, but also benefits when they collide with mainstream sites such as Facebook or YouTube or whatever. So essentially, what I'm going to, is this going to work? I'll just do it this way. What I'm talking about to some extent is this notion of, which we know about, this idea of the public and the private colliding. So what we've got here is a picture of me along with some other people at a Facebook event that was held at Liverpool John Moores last year. Fine, no problem. What you've also got here is a picture of me on Facebook with my partner enjoying a day out in Blackpool. My partner is the one not in the middle on the left-hand side. Engaged in some other activity which may well sort of position me in a very different way. Okay, so we're all aware of this problem of employers seeing people on Facebook and them getting sacked or saying something. So there's this kind of thing going on. I want to take that a stage further and make it a little bit more extreme by looking at this kind of site. So here what you've got in the end is my profile picture from the site Gaydar. You will notice I look nothing like the advertisements. But what happens when my activities or position in that site clashes with something like Facebook? My employer sees that I'm on this site and I'm doing certain things. What happens there? So if I tell you a little bit about Gaydar, Gaydar basically as an idea is premised on the idea that gay people have phenotypical characteristics, i.e. we all mince along like this and you can guess who somebody is. You've got a gay radar basically. That's the idea of it. So obviously this site is about finding gay people, so they've termed it Gaydar. And you can see from the imagery, it starts to configure people in a very specific way. And as has been said in one of the gay lifestyle magazines, you only have to surf Gaydar for a few minutes to gauge what makes so many gay men tick. This, apparently. So, if we look inside Gaydar and start to look at how we make sort of a profile, it looks very much like many other interfaces you might have seen, although to be fair, I think Gaydar has been criticised for being not as up-to-date as maybe some of the more mainstream social networking sites. It's very much positioned as old technology, actually, by many of its users. But what happens is, in the same way as many other internet dating sites would happen, is you start getting this tick box scenario happening where you're configuring your profile. And this is where I start to argue that basically this is where sort of you start to, as Jenny Sundin would put it, you start to write yourself into being almost. And Dana Boyd has taken this bit further and said, actually, what collections of people do on these kind of sites is start to write a community into being. Now, what I want to get to towards the end is this idea of people being written into being who aren't even associated with this site. So this site starts to speak for other LGBT people who are not even enrolled on it. And that becomes an influence upon how people perceive that particular group. So you see pretty standard stuff in here, but some of the stuff that are maybe not so standard that you wouldn't expect is this idea that, you know, you might be looking, for example, for particular sexual activities that might not be seen as the norm, okay? In terms of, say, for example, one-on-one sex versus group sex. It starts to say something about you if you're going to tick and say that that's what I'm interested in. Similarly, in terms of maybe what your sexual position is, a default in society would be sort of, you know, woman on the bottom, man on top. Well, obviously, where you've got two people of the same sex involved, that needs to be negotiated. And again, so you get these roles coming in, and it starts to configure people in a particular way. More explicitly, and this is what I've called before the village people categories, is you basically, down here are various tick boxes that you can say, these are the types that I like. So you do get the standard, oh, I want the firefighter, I want the policeman. You also get some categories that are specific to like the LGBT community, like bears and cubs and those kind of things. Now, so this further contributes to this creation of a particular identity, I would argue. Up here, what we've got is Gaydar, sort of an on-running contest that happens within Gaydar known as Sex Factor. So the idea is that you can put yourself forward into these categories, and the prize is that you become the image for the next month for that category. Okay, which, again, these are very sort of kind of order categories. You've got somebody who's interested in rubber, leather, you've got cubs, you've got the guy next door, you've got bears, you know, you've got couples, you've got these. They're all sort of these things, tick boxes that you've got to put yourself into. And what I find interesting in terms of what isn't there is this kind of character. Because we all have to be butch, you know, we all have to be very masculine, hyper-masculine. Nobody wants to get into bed with somebody who's like this, who's a camp guy. So there's these things that are included or not included. Now, so far what I've talked about is this idea of, it's almost like I'm going into what we would call technological determinism, the idea that the technology is going to play out in the way that the designer intended. What I've found in these sites is that there's a lot of argument that goes off within them. So, for example, people use free text spaces in the site to basically say, well, actually, I want to be, you know, I want to be Mr. Humphreys. I'm quite happy being Mr. Humphreys. I don't have to be like. So there is this actual dialogue within the site, although that is very limited because of the way that Gaydar is structured and is made to work. It's very flat pages, and, you know, basically it's like an advert, personal ads. You don't have the facility to create groups like you would have in Facebook to organise around things. And what I'm going to go on and talk about in a moment, well, after I've done a bit more on the commodification of different stuff, is the argument that basically what's happened and what I've seen happen is that for various reasons, various people have engaged with Facebook to overcome some of the technological limitations of Gaydar and what it allows you to do or not. But further fueling this stereotyping stuff, we get into arguments around the commodification of difference. So this research is associated with Gaydar to some extent. Thanks, I've got 5 minutes. So basically you get these stats coming from it, basically saying that basically we use more cosmetics. I admit I did use 2 forms of mousse on my hair today. I did not use hair bleach, but you see how basically you've got this myth of the pink pound where gay men specifically are positioned as other in relation to other forms of sexuality. I particularly like this one. Younger gays are more likely to use the extra features and services on their mobile phones. So this all then gets used by sort of people, QSoft, the company behind Gaydar, in terms of this market data. And so there's almost like an inbuilt mechanism for we need these classifications in order to market to people. Now, in the last 5 minutes, what I want to do is talk very quickly about what's happening on Facebook. So what basically has happened is I just thought, a couple of years ago, I thought, I'm just going to search Facebook and see if I can find anything about Gaydar. And I found these groups, basically things like Gaydar is a pile of crap, Facebook isn't Gaydar, put your shirt back on. And from that, I've spoken to some of the people in these groups, and they've allowed me to use this stuff from them. But some of them are set up for fun, some of them are more sort of politically oriented. It's like they don't want to be seen in the way that Gaydar might present them as, because even if they're not part of that. And so basically, I really like this quote from Gary that I got back from him in response to an email asking him if I could use some of his data. He basically ends it saying, I hope Gaydar shuts down. I mean, I'm not so fussed about that, to be honest. I mean, I think Gaydar can actually be quite a good space for people. It's a very safe place for people to come out in. But he's basically saying it doesn't represent the modern gay society. So you've got these people arguing about the fact that it just doesn't represent them, and they've chosen to move on to something like Facebook. Now, the point around this, I'm not going to go through these, I haven't got too much more time left, but the point around this, I think, is that by taking this activity into naming Gaydar within Facebook, the people within Facebook who they are also associated with are going to see that they've made these posts. It opens up Gaydar to a wider audience, in the same way as me coming and talking to you here now. I mean, I would imagine most people in this room will not have heard of it, despite the fact that it's got 5 million users worldwide. I think that's the power. The fact that it's got 5 million users worldwide, it says, in some respects, says a lot about gay men because of the way that it configures them as such. And opening it up to Facebook then means that other people might see then that there's Gaydar here. Oh, that's what gay men are like. You know, they're just sex-craved creatures. I mean, for me, it's once a month if the wind's blowing in the right direction. So we come back to this whole thing of the classification thing. So you've got this idea of, look, are gay men really like the village people or not? You know, are lesbians all bull dykes? Well, no. You know, it doesn't quite work like that. And I think the sort of the increasing importance of all this, and I've just got 2 more slides and it'll literally take about 30 seconds, is this idea of sort of Gaydar and other sites like this are being linked into other forms of media. So here you've got Gaydar having a Twitter profile. You read the Twitter profile, and it's very much like sort of 25,000 guys up to mischief, a lunchtime quickie, highly sexually charged. Again, people being configured, Gaydar configuring people in very particular ways and not acknowledging that maybe you know, people who identify as LGBT do other things than, you know, stay in bed all day or stay on Gaydar. And furthermore, finally, if we look at sort of Gaydar as an example, it has all these other things that it's into as well. So you can access it via your mobile. They've now set up podcasting. There's Gaydar Radio. They sponsor things like Pride. So this thing becomes immersive around you. And I think that's sort of quite important because of the implications that sort of that sites such as this, which configure people in particular ways, have. And I'll finish at that point. Thanks very much.